Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's expert webinar on getting started with Spring Cloud. I'm Satyakshi from SpringPeople. We are India's largest enterprise training provider. So in today's webinar, we have our technology expert Vinod, who has 15 plus years of experience in a wide spectrum of technologies, including Java EE, Hibernate, Spring, AngularJS, Hadoop, Python, R programming, to name a few. With top MNCs such as SAP, Dell, IBM, Capgemini, etc., Vinod has worked across the software cycle as a developer, consultant, and trainer, right from training and designing to implementing and testing. He is Java 6 certified and frequently works with various education partners to develop and impart technical courseware for partners and employees. Today, Vinod will deep dive into the main concepts of Spring Cloud, including configuration server design, backends and convictions. He talk about HTTP service endpoints, configuration hierarchy, and configuration refresh. He will also take us through a lab session where he will demonstrate setting up a config server and various other aspects such as changing logging levels and reinitializing beans with @refresh scope. So if we have any questions during the session, please type it in the chat box and they will be addressed by Vinod after the presentation is over. So without further ado, let's start today's session. Over to you, Vinod.
Thank you very much, Satyakshi. All right. Hi all. Good afternoon. My name is Vinod Kumar Mahendra, and I would be driving you today for Spring Cloud. In that Spring Cloud, I would be talking about Spring Config server for you. Now, for the people who don't know what is Spring Cloud, I just have a small message saying that a Spring Cloud, it provides tools for developers in order to build some of the common patterns when you're working with a microservices based application. For example, it might be a configuration management, service discovery, circuit breaker, and many more things are there. So to implement this particular patterns to your application, okay, without the Spring Cloud, it would be really challenging. So the Spring Cloud, what they did was they tried handshaking with the Netflix open source software, who are the pioneers of building your cloud services, who are the pioneers of providing a lot of design patterns on microservices. So these people, pivotal guys, joined with Netflix, and they took 40% of their code and they made this particular tool available for most of the developers over there. So further, you can see that there are many projects which is available in this particular Spring Cloud. Among this particular projects for today's topic, what I would be talking here is I would be trying to talk about this particular Spring Cloud config server. Now, what is this Spring Cloud config server is all about, and how are we going to see some of the application using this particular Spring Cloud config server? That is what our topic for today's agenda is all about. So let's get started on this Spring Cloud config server. This Spring Cloud config server acts like a configuration as what a configuration as a service. So there are other projects also comes like Istrix, Heroka, Ribbon, Fijian, and Zool, and all. It's all related to Spring Cloud, Netflix over there, and other main projects also there. Let us focus on to what we would be focusing only on to this Spring Cloud config server for you. So basically, it is being developed by your Spring team for us. So let us look at before Spring Cloud services, before introducing into it, how traditionally you were trying to write your application using Spring. You were trying to configure the configuration into an application. And further, it was being fetched from where it would be being fetched from your class path. For best example, let us give you that, you would have been written your application connecting to your database. So basically what you were trying to do, you were trying to create an application.properties file. Under that application.properties file, you used to configure that driver class, you used to configure the JDBC URL, username, password, etc. over there. And if you have written using a Spring based application, usually you would have been kept this properties file under src main resources. And further, using that value annotation with the spell, I used to pull those particular values and read it in my application over there. This is how we were trying to build our applications. Further going, see that the evolution has been changed today, saying that a Spring is also supporting reading configurations from your YAML files. Basically, the YAML files are having an extension called .yml. I'm going to show you a few of the YAML files when I'm trying to demonstrate you to this particular lab. Now, apart from that, it also knows how to read from your system properties of Java as well as environment variables. Now, let us try to talk onto this config server, which are the main concepts over here. What it tries to do, it tries to take those configuration which you were returning in application.properties file, it goes to externalize that configuration outside your application. Now, doing so, what did you achieve? You try to achieve a centralization of the configuration information for multiple services as well as multiple environments over there. So that is another interesting thing which you need to look at. Another point which I like to highlight about the concepts of config server, this is acting like a service for you. Basically, this config server tries to expose as an HTTP REST endpoint for reading your application configuration. Now, we would be looking at all these things one by one as we try to proceed over there. Now, let's look at the design here. So the design very clearly says that it's a notion of backend where configuration files would be stored. Basically, this particular backend server, it might be a Git server, but I would be showing you a demo related to Git server. But the backend can be anything. It can be your database, it can be your file system, or it can be your Amazon cloud. Whatever the backend server, you can keep those configuration files over there. Now, what does the config server would be trying to do? It reads this configuration from backend server and exposes it as an HTTP REST endpoints for the applications to consume. And another interesting part here is there is a conventions. That is how files and REST endpoints are named make it easy to expose this configuration for different applications in a different environments for us. So I would be showing you what are those particular conventions is all about. Now let's look at this backend. This is what I was trying to convey. The backend is all about, it supports multiple types of backends. For example, I would be demonstrating an example related to Git. Apart from Git, you can have the subversion, you can have a file system, you can also have a database, you can also have an Amazon S3, etc. Then it also supports what? It also supports some composite of backends over there. That is, you can have multiple backends like Git combined with what? Combined with your database. So this is all about your backends. Now going further, I like to talk about your conventions. This part you need to you know whenever you try to work with your application, your spring.application name should be used in order to identify your application in your local environment. So that is where this becomes what? This becomes your mandatory property for your application. Then the names of the file are stored in a backend server for you, and the parts of the endpoints would be exposed by a config server, which going to have some specific pattern. Now, going further, let us try looking at what are those particular specific pattern is all about. Now let's look at your backend file name. What are when I try to save something in my backend file, what are those particular pattern is all about? Ashish, can you see now? Hello?
Yes, sir. Perfect audible. Please carry on. No issue.
Okay. Just all right. So I was trying to provide you, basically backend file name convention. The default pattern should be your application followed by dash profile dot properties or YAML file. For example, you're going to have that spring dot application dot name is assigned to be as greeting, and the spring dot profiles dot active, you say that it is a QA. Now, if this is a configured in your bootstrap.yml file, so what should be the configuration file should be stored in backend server. See that I would be storing it as greeting, that would be my application name, followed by dash profile would be a qa.yml file. You can either store it in YAML file, or you can store it as greeting-qa.properties file. A small note for you, the pattern can be customized via this particular configuration property named by one of the property by name called search paths. Going further, I also like to highlight that if your config server is reading that particular information from the backend server, how that config server exposes the service endpoints. Here are a few examples have been listed for you. The first one is it is slash your application name slash your profile, then slash with a label. Then again, you can also look at your one more endpoint like application dash profile dot YAML file, or you can also have your label slash application dash profile dot YML file. Okay, then you're going to have what? Can I have a properties file? Yes, you can also have the properties file. You can also have the properties file, application dash profile dot properties file. Then you know you're going to have the label slash application dash profile dot properties file. Now, whenever you use a Git background, the label always maps to what? It goes to maps to your branch name. And remember, the label is what? It's an optional. And in case if you never specify the default, it would be leading to where? It would be leading to a master. Having said this, let us look at your configuration hierarchy. When you look at your configuration hierarchy here, um, your generic configuration that applies to all the applications in all the environments, they can be placed in a very special file name by name called application.yml file. And this generic configuration, sometimes even we call it to be as default configuration, that would be applied to all the applications in that specific environment. And it can be also, some files which is related to a specific environment, it can be named as what? It can be named as application-profile.yml file over there. Now, if you're running your applications in a profile specific, what it tries to do, it tries to override all these properties which is being present. Uh, it would be present in application.yml file. All right. Now, going further, what I like to do here is, uh, you know, let me let us take one example here. For given, I have been configured your spring.application.name to be greeting and a profile.active to be QA. Okay, for an example, you can see that your spring.application.name, I have been named to be as greeting, and the profiles.active, I have been set to be as QA. Now, in my config server, what would be the endpoints? It becomes your HTTP followed by host colon port number. For example, if you're running in a localhost, that is your Tomcat, it would be a localhost colon 8080 slash, for config server, there is a default port number. The default port number would be 48. All right. Slash greeting slash QA. What does it tries to do? It tries to read okay, it goes to read what? It goes to read the files which you're going to keep as either application.yml file or either application.properties file, or it also reads if you have been kept it as application-qa.yml file or greeting.yml file or greeting-qa.yml file. All these things it would be reading it in a single JSON response. We would be looking at this part shortly. Then the configuration properties in the more specific named files, it tries to override a setting in a the more general file for us. Now, during a lab, I would be showing one of the properties file over there. So the next thing, this is how the output of your application looks like. If you say your localhost 8090 in my example, and if you say greeting slash QA, you can observe that if this is my URL provided here, so the application name is greeting and the profiles here is QA. See that the label is being set to be null. And also, if you look at this property source, it is trying to read your greetingqa.yml file also. It is reading a greeting.yml file also, as well as it also read your application.yml file. And what is this display fortune? These are nothing but the properties over there, like securities, other interesting properties is being specified over there. Now, this is what your config server, how it reads those files and displays it. Having said all these things for you, it's a time for me to look at your architecture here. So look at this architecture. This architecture is very clear. We're going to have a centralized repository. In our example, I'm showing you with the Git repository. So there is a property called greeting with saying, oh, hi. So that configuration is being pushed by an ops team for us. And those particular configuration, there is a config server is there. What it tries to do here is it keeps sending the heartbeat for a Git repository and it pulls what it tries to pulls those particular configuration, source configuration over there. And after pulling it, what does my config server tries to do? My config server tries to expose us via an endpoint, and there is an app A, app B, app C. They're all an instances of same app, but it is being named as A, B, and C. They try to pull configuration from where? They try to pull configuration from the config server. So once you know about it, what is how I'm going to set up this server here? To set up your server, all you need to do here is you need to add a dependency. If you're using a Gradle or Maven, you just need to put that Spring Cloud config server, that dependency over there. Then you try to enable config server annotation on a Spring Boot application class. For example, configuring for Git background to a public repository, your application.properties file. In that application.properties file, you need to specify one of the property called spring.cloud.config server.git.uri to that particular github.com username config-repo.git. And many more configuration options are available for it. For more information, I would request you to look at the reference manual of this particular Spring Cloud config server. Now, having said that, the next interesting thing here is, what about my config clients over there? For a config client, you need to add a dependency. What is the dependency you're going to add? It is again a Spring Cloud starter config dependency. And then you're going to set a Spring Cloud config URI for the location for your config server. And spring.application name must be set in a config file. You should be a bootstrap.yml file. Make sure that it is not application.yml file there. Alternatively, if config server is registered with Heroka, that is a naming server, it can look up for a config server via Heroka by setting one of the property called cloud config discovery.enabled over there. Now, refreshing the configuration. How do you refresh your configuration here is on initialization, the client fetches its configuration from a config server itself. That is, when you try to start your config client, basically you would see in a console the log information saying that, hey, it is going to look for a config server over there with the application name as well as your active profile. And also there is one endpoint in actuator dependency by name called refresh endpoint. That refresh endpoint, what you need to do, you need to use an HTTP post in order to refresh that particular microservice. And once you hit that particular refresh endpoint, the client goes to refetch the updates from the config server. Now, what would be the procedure here? You have to update the configuration in a backend, that is either commit or push the change over there, and you need to send an HTTP post to an application refresh endpoint. And what it would do, the Spring application context would be reloaded with updated configuration for us. Now, what are the properties which can be refreshed? For example, it would be a logging levels, or it would be a Spring Beans of type where you have been annotated as configuration property, or any Spring Bean which is being annotated as refresh bean, it would automatically refresh over there. In our example, I would be showing you about what I would be showing you related to logging levels. Now let's show you one simple example. In my client application, what I'm trying to do, I have been adding one particular annotation that is nothing but refresh scope. So whenever you hit that actuator refresh endpoint, automatically this particular bean gets what? It automatically gets refreshed. Then the next interesting thing which I like to talk here is, see that if you're having thousands of instances, like I'm having 1,000 client application, I have been scaled out. Now each time you cannot try to hit that particular refresh endpoint. For that, you're going to come across what? You're going to come across something, a new project by name called Spring Cloud Bus. Here is a solution to the problem of having to refresh multiple instances of multiple applications without having to send each application instance with a refresh endpoint. But this particular Spring Cloud Bus makes use of messaging bus for here. It supports a advanced messaging queuing protocol. For example, it supports your RabbitMQ also as well as Kafka. And even ActiveMQ also it tries to support. And this Spring Cloud Bus goes to expose its own endpoint by name called bus/refresh. Now, we're receiving application instance, broadcast your refresh message to all the instances for us over there. For more information on this, I would recommend you to look for that particular URL like cloud.spring.io Spring Cloud Bus for us. Now, how does the config server and Spring Cloud Bus works here? In a picture, you can observe that your config server is trying to read what? It is trying to read a source configuration from Git repository. Now, there are three instances of my app like A, B, as well as C. Now, using your Postman or any REST client, I'm going to say, hey, HTTP method to be post, and the endpoint would be what? The endpoint would be bus/refresh. As soon as I try to hit for one of the instance over there, what would happen here is it goes to send a message to the cloud bus, and the cloud bus, what it tries to do, it goes to ensure that it tries to notify, send the messages for all the instances present in that particular boundary. So hitting it to one of the app instance, that is A, the message is sent to whom? It has been sent to B as well as it has been sent to C also. So what they try to do, they try to pull the updated information from config server. This is how config server and Spring Cloud Bus works. So after learning all these things, what are the benefits of the config server? Observe the benefits here. All the configuration would be available in one place. That is one place to review as well as modify your configuration. And there are separate application development lifecycle from your configuration lifecycle over here. You can reconfigure the aspects running application without downtime. For example, logging or some kind of feature toggles based on the SLA. And you might ask me, hey, will it be encrypted? Yes, it supports an encryption of some sensitive configuration properties. There are various ways are there, like for example, you can use symmetric encryption or asymmetric key pair, or you can use a Spring Vault service also. And there is a choice of Git backend provides complete configuration history, which is auditability, that is who made a configuration change and when it has been made. All those things you would be able to get. So this is all about the theory part of your config server, config cloud, as well as Spring Cloud Bus. Now, let us do what? Let us do a lab for you. So I just wanted you to understand the lab. So let us get into what? Let us get into the lab here. So in the lab, the first and foremost thing what I like to do here is I have already, you can observe that I am already having a repository created for you, and I have been set this particular repository to be as config server. So basically, I'm having few of the files like hello world, greeting config, YML file over there. Now again, um, I come back to this particular backend server shortly for you. I just move back to this particular Spring Tool suite, and let me show you that I have been already built this application. The first application is nothing but your config server based application. So this is basically a Spring Boot application over there. See that in this particular config server, what I have been done here is I have this particular pom.xml file. I open this pom.xml file. Okay, so you can observe that in this pom.xml file, we already know that it's a Spring Boot based application. I'm taking the latest version of the Spring Boot, that is 2.2.8 over there. And also what I have been done here is I also have having a latest version of Spring Cloud, that is nothing but Oxton SR6. Now, because there are two parents over there, how do I configure this particular Spring Cloud is I have been used this particular dependency management, and in this particular dependency management, I have added that particular Spring Cloud dependencies. This would be done when you try to use your Spring Tool suite in order to create your Spring Boot application along with one of the dependency called what? Along with one of the dependency called config server. So adding this Spring Cloud config server dependency to your class path, this particular application, what is my application name? That is a config server is eligible to embed what is eligible to embed your config server over there. Now, once this dependency is added, what is next interesting thing which you're going to come across? You're going to come across your class. So let me try to talk about your class by name called config server application. So in this config server application, if you observe that there is an annotation, note that there is an annotation by name called enable config server. And what does this enable config server tries to do? This annotation enables this would embeds the config server. This would embed the config server. Then once you have been set with that, what is the next thing here? Let us look at your application.yml file. So in your application.yml file, where it is being present under src main resources. If you look at this application.yml file, this going to have what? This going to have some config information over there. Now, what are the configuration information you're going to have? The first important thing you're going to observe here is your Spring application name. What is your application name? It is your config server. Then there is one property by name called spring.cloud.config.server git URI, and that git URI you can observe that I have been referring to that config server git, which I have been shown you that particular repository. This would be my repository URL. Now, when you work, if you really want to change that, you can change your config server over here. Now, what in case if I am having a folders over there, for example, in my repository, if I'm going to create a folders like dev or in other word branches like dev branch or QA branch like that, then one more property is there. What is that property here is nothing but your search path. And within that search path, you can specify the folder, whether it is dev or whether it is a QA or whatever it is. Then, because I want to show you a demo in a local environment, always the default port number for this particular server port would be 8888. 48s. Now what we try to do here, I try to open this particular config server on Windows Explorer. And this is my config server. I just open it in my command prompt, and I like to run this particular application here by saying my me1 clean spring boot run. Okay, MVN is not recognized here. That's okay. I use this me1 wrapper and clean spring boot run over here. When I hit this command, so you can see that once this command is being executed, your config server would be running locally. I allow the access here. And I got an information saying that it is being started. Okay, so you can observe that it is started in a port number called 8888. The reason here is I asked my config server in my application.properties file, I have been said that this is 4x. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to the repository over here. See that because this is a demo session, I have already created one of the YAML file. What is that YAML file is all about? It is an hello world.yaml file. When you look at this YAML file, there is one property. What is that property here? It is a name. I have been assigned to be as what? I have been assigned to be as Vinod over there. Now, if this file I have been committed, what my config server should be able to do, my config server should be able to read this configuration file. Now, the URL to access this would be what? It would be your HTTP colon localhost, and the port number would be 48 slash your application name. What is your application name? In my case, it's a file name, that is your hello dash world. Then I say that it is a default profile. It's a default profile. So if I copy this entire URL and if I paste it on the browser window, you should be able to see that my application server, sorry, my config server is now able to read that particular file and displays in JSON format. Okay, this would take a little bit of time there. Okay, I need to give some time for it to load. Uh, just a second, let me change my network settings over here. Okay, let me hit this default one. Let me go for incognito window, paste this localhost with that. Okay, this is trying to consume a little bit of time. Let's see whether my config server is reading it. Okay, let it get refreshed. Okay, meanwhile, I just this is all about you try to deal with your config server over here. The only thing here is, the network is pretty slow here. That's the reason it is not able to pull out what it is not able to pull that, configuration information. But still, you can see that it is still loading over here, but it would take or just a fractions of second. All right. Meanwhile, what I try to teach you here is, let this be updating here. Okay, I give the sweet time for it. Okay, let it get upgraded. Um, okay, so let me give some time for it to read, or let me stop this and let me start once again. Okay, so let me stop this and let us run my config server once again. So I can see that my config server application is been running here. It has been successful. Now, what I try to do here is, let me try to hit this URL once again. Let's see that it has been failed now. Here it is having an error. No such label by name called master. Okay, now let's hit this once again. I got that. So I told you, like, in case if you are having some network issues, then it wouldn't be able to load it. Now you can see this is my JSON data. Now in incognito window, I don't have that JSON formatted, that's okay. But here you can observe that the name of the application is Hello World and the profiles here is default, and it tries to pull out the property source. What is my property source here is nothing but name to be as Vinod. And where it is pulling from, it is been pulling from that particular config server get hello world .yml file. Okay, so you need to understand that my profile, in my case, the URL to access my config server is my application name followed by my profile. So that is all about what that's all about your config server is all about. Now let's go ahead and try to create one more application which is called to be as config client. So I have an application created for you. What is that application here? I just close all the file. I say my application to be as greeting config. Now first thing, I like to look at your pom.xml file over here. In your pom.xml file, if you observe this pom.xml file over here, you can see that this is also a Spring Boot based application, which is having a current version of Spring Boot that is 2.2.8. There is 2.3 and 2.4 M4 is also being released, but I'm restricting myself with the stable release called to be as 2.2.8. Then you can also see the cloud version, which is nothing but your Hoxton.sr6 over there. Then I have added few of the dependencies. What are those dependencies? If you ask me, I have been added a dependency by name called Spring Cloud. Okay, you can observe that I am having a lot of dependency like actuator, bus AMQP, then a time leaf, web, etc. Because I want to show you this to be as a web application and I just want some UI to be created as a time leaf. But the most important thing which you need to notice here is the config client dependency. That is nothing but Spring Cloud Services Starter Config Client from a group ID called io.pivotal.spring.cloud. So this is very important dependency which I like to add it up. Then let me review another file. What is that another file I want you to review areas in a greeting config? As I told you earlier in a theory, you shouldn't have an application.yml file. You should have it as what? You should have it as your bootstrap.yml file. So if you look at this bootstrap.yml file, you can see that the application name I have been set as what? I have been set as your greeting config. That defines the name of what? That defines the name of your application. And this value would be used in several places within your Spring Cloud, locating configuration files by name, service discovery, or registration by name, etc. Now, in our example, I'm not going to show you about your discovery or registration by name. I would be showing you that how to use the configuration file by name called greeting config. Now you need to notice one more property. What is the property is missing? There is a spring cloud.config.uri. That particular property is missing over there. Now, you might ask me a query saying that how does this greeting config going to connect with this particular config server over there? See that the default URL for for a config server by your config client, it would be your localhost colon 888. And if you observe my config server is running in a port number called 888. So I did not specify that particular property, Spring Cloud config URI property over there. Now, what I try to do, I'm going to open one more terminal of a greeting config. It's basically a Spring Boot based application using a time leaf. So I open this, and what I say here is I'm going to say that my Maven wrapper clean Spring Boot colon run. Okay, now it is being accessed over there. That is your greeting config is being able to read. Now going further, what I like you to do here is in my repository, I have been configured few of the files over there. So those particular files, for example, let us say I just go back to my Git repository, which is being present here. which is a config server. In this config server, I have been specified there is one default YAML file. What is that YAML file is all about? It is my greeting config.yml file. Now in this YAML file, the first thing what I have been done, I have been used something called to be as one of the property, which is nothing but your auto configure, exclude as well as include. All right. Now, what does it means to say that? It means to say one of the property that security auto configuration as well as management web security auto configuration, I am trying to disable it. Okay, earlier versions of a Spring Boot, I was saying that security basic enabled, I was setting it to be false. Now let's do one thing. I just edit this file, and let me copy all this content. Let me try to copy all this content, and I open the Visual Studio. And let me paste it here. Let me paste it here. I'll be using one after one for you. Let me demonstrate you a little bit. Let me try to commit the changes. Now, when I commit these changes, this greeting config.yml file is not having anything. Now, to access my config client, what is the URL to access my config client here? It's very simple. All I need to do here is I need to say your localhost, that is your HTTP colon your localhost, and you also have a port number called what? Port number called 8080. Now this URL you need to hit where? You need to hit on this browser. When you hit this onto your browser, you can see that it is printing what? It is printing a message called greetings. You will be hungry again in 1 hour. And this information is printing because why? Because if you notice your application now, let us say that let me restart your application first. This is my this is my greeting config application over there. So what I try to do here is, as well as this is my config server. So what I try to do, let me restart my application here. Let me stop this, and let me try to restart my config client. Meanwhile, let me close this greetings. Let it get started. Now, if you look at this output very carefully, okay, let's say I just go to my properties here. I reduce the fonts. I reduce the fonts to 14. Now, if you look at this information on your console, you can observe very clearly that the first thing which you need to make a note is it is when your application is starting, it is trying to fetch a configuration from this particular server. So what is that server? It is localhost followed by 4 8s over there. Then also observe that because if you look at your application very clearly, that is greeting.config.pom.xml file, you have been added what? You have been added this dependency called security. That is Spring Boot Starter Security dependency. When you had this particular dependency, what is happening? Now let us open what? Let me open this localhost 8080 over there. When I try to open this localhost 8080, earlier you saw the information saying that greetings with saying that you're going to be angry after 1 hour. But now let's run this. Let me hit this in localhost 8080. So it is waiting for, I believe that it is running here 8080 over here. Basically, this would get you what it would be getting you the dialog box for you. Let me open a browser here itself. Let me terminate this once again. Let me terminate this. Let me run this greeting config in your STS itself. I like to run this as a Spring Boot app. So you can observe in your console, the first thing it tries to fetch from that localhost. Okay, you can see that it is being started and it is running successfully. This is what we saw in a console. Now you can see that it is asking me the form login. So you basically need to provide what you need to provide your username as well as password in order to log into your application. So what is that username? What is that password? If you ask me, the default username would be, first thing you need to just look at your bootstrap.yml file. You haven't configured any username or password for it. You haven't configured anything there. So what you need to do here is you need to specify the username as your user. You need to type it as an user, and the password is something which you're going to see it in your console. If you observe the console here, the password is generated. You just need to copy this password and then you need to paste it on that particular form-based login in order to see that particular message. That is your greetings. So this is all about what this is all about. You are having a basic security for your application, that is for your greeting, that is your config client. Now, the next question comes here is there is one external user would be there. You would go to the client application, that is my greeting application, but he wouldn't have been registered to this greetings application. But I need to give him an access saying that he can access the application and do some auditing work. So what I would do, I try to configure centralized configuration. Now, this is my situation. I want to disable what? I want to disable this particular security. How do I do that? Earlier, we were trying to do here is earlier version of Spring Boot. There was something called some property by name called we were saying that security basic enabled as well as management security enabled. We were setting this one to be false. But now we won't be doing like that because we are using something Spring Boot 2.x. There is a property, let me edit this property. Before that, let me stop your greeting service, that is your greeting config. Now, these two properties, that is a Spring auto configure, your exclude as well as include this particular property. What you try to do, you're going to add it. And this particular property management endpoints, this is for what? This is for actuator endpoints over there. Now let us try to add what? Let us try to add this two properties over there. Let me paste this. Now let me try to remove this part. Let me remove this part. Now I just commit these changes. I commit the changes. So what are the properties I have been added here? I have been added that you need to exclude that security auto configuration, as well as you need to exclude a management web security auto configuration. Now, what is this classes? This classes was something which was trying to give auto configuration for your application. When you say exclude this, it means to say that in your application, when you now start it, now let's start your greeting application once again. When you now start your Spring Boot application over there, because you have configured saying that, hey, you have to exclude these files in a Git repository, see that when you try to hit your config server, what is a config server here? The URL for a config server, it would be your localhost 8888 followed by greeting config, that is my application name slash default, that's the profile. If you have this default over there, if you type this URL, you can observe that the application name greeting config, the profile is default, and what is the property source? You can observe that we have been excluded two of the auto configuration class, which is related to security as well as management web security over there. Now your config server reads this. Our question here is whether my config client, when it tries to read, first time when you run your application, you can observe that it is running, fetching the information, At the same time, you can see that the password is not generated here. Because why? Because that particular property you have been disabled. Now, if you look at your localhost 8080, see that earlier it was asking you for a login page. Now, if you look at for a localhost 8080 and enter, you can see that there is no login page. It is directly navigating to what? It is directly navigating to your greetings. Now, once you know about this, now let's review what. Let us review some. You can also see that some of the log information for you. What is that log information here is? It says that it is located environment named to be as greeting config and profiles is default, and you can see that it is trying to load the bootstrap properties that URL greeting config dot YML file. So this is something very interesting. You need to look at how the property source bootstrap configuration is looking over there. Now let's see another use case of config server and config client. That is nothing but changing log levels. For that, I am having one example here. I'm going to go to that greeting controller, which has been present in greeting config. What is that? Here is, in this particular controller, there is a greeting controller is being present. In this greeting controller, you can observe that I am just having this greeting controller. This greeting controller is having a logger. In this logger, you can see that in a get greeting method, there is a logger.debug that is add greeting. This message is being present. Now, so far, you are not able to see this particular debug message because why? Because you were in a info. See that by default, only log labels such as error, warn, and info will be logged. You need to change the log level to what? You need to change your log level to debug in order to observe this. Okay. So how do you do that is a question comes into picture. All you need to do it is you need to edit that same YML file. Let's say that I just go back to my uh, Git configuration and I like to edit this. Okay, so I like to edit this. This time, what I try to do, I'm going to say that your logging dot level dot spring cloud, this part, I'm going to copy this property and I'm going to set this property to be as what I say this property instead of info, I change this to debug. Then I save this file, I commit the changes here in my Git repository. As soon as I made the changes to my Git repository, you need to see the beauty of your config server here. It is trying to read that my logging level spring.cloud to be as debug. All right. Now looking at your application console here, I cleared the screen. and I go to the browser for a greeting, and I like to refresh it multiple number of times. And let's see that in my console, I'm not able to see anything about the debug message there. Now, what went wrong is a question comes into picture. The answer here is my config server is not able to read this properly. So config client is not able to read this properly. So whatever the changes which I have been done for my Git repository, my config server is able to read, but my config client is not able to read. For this, I have this pom.xml file. In this particular pom.xml file, I also have this particular actuator dependency. Now this actuator dependency is just it is trying to display what it is displaying only 1 2 endpoints for me as of now. So I just need to go ahead. Let's say that there is one more property is there, that is nothing but management endpoint web. Let me add this property. This is turning this particular property. What it tries to do, it going to turn off your actuator endpoints for me. So let me go to your pom.xml file. I mean to say your greeting config.yml file. Let me edit this for now. Now instead of logging level, I just remove this, and I just put this management endpoints over there, and then I commit the changes. The next step I will show you about the logging level over there. Now after doing this much of change, I just need to restart my application to ensure that that refresh endpoint has been available. So let me look at your console. Okay, so if you look at this information which is available, you can see that there are nearly around some endpoints are exposed here, like exposing 20 endpoints under the beneath of what? Under the beneath of manage. So if I just move to this localhost 8080, I copy this and say slash manage. You can see there are so many endpoints are there. Like these endpoints are really provides an information related to metrics, health checkup, and many other stuff, mappings, etc. But I am interested into what? I am interested into one of the two endpoints I'm interested. The first one which I'm interested here is your refresh endpoint. You can see this refresh endpoint. I'm interested in this refresh endpoint over there. So this refresh endpoint is being using an HTTP method called post over there. An HTTP method called post. Now, who provides this endpoint? It is being provided by your actuator dependency. Actuator dependency. Now, what I try to do here is I just navigate back to my repository over here. Let me get into your repository. And in my repository, I'm going to edit I'm going to edit the logging level. I'm going to change now the logging level. Instead of info, I'm going to change it to be as debug. Now, after changing it to debug, I save my file, I commit the changes. Now, if you look at my config server goes to read both the properties. One is called that management endpoints exposure, base path to be slash manage, and the wildcard over there. This is where making 20 endpoints available. And my Spring Cloud is being attached to be what? My logging level is attached to be debug. Now, if I look at my console, okay, I clear my console here. If I clear my console, and after clearing my console, if I want to hit my greeting controller, it's nothing but the localhost 8080. So when I hit that localhost 8080, when I hit this localhost 8080, I'm able to see this greetings message, but an interesting thing, I'm not able to see this log messages over here. I'm not able to see what? I'm not able to see that debug message. So if my greeting config should fetch an information from this config server, what I am supposed to do, I need to go ahead and hit what? I want to hit the post request. Let's say that I want to hit the post request. The URL for that would be your HTTP localhost 8080 manage refresh. This would be my URL. Then I need to send the request here. When I send this request, you need to observe that a status code is 200. That's okay. And you can also see that the config client version and the logging level spring.cloud has been updated. These two information, it is displayed. Now, let me go ahead and refresh my greetings here. When I refresh my greetings for the first time, and if I look at my console, I see my debug information, and you can see that add greeting, this debug information I'm able to see. But this time you need to notice that I haven't started what? I haven't started my greeting config. Now, once again, you try to refresh it. So you would be seeing that log message over there, add greeting, second time. Okay. Now let's say that I'm not able to see this adding fortune information over there. So let us try to turn a feature by name called at the rate of configuration properties over there. For this, what I try to do, I just go to that, your file is there like config developer greeting properties. In this greeting properties, if you look at this, this is my class greeting properties, which is having a display fortune property, which is a boolean type, and I have annotated this as what? I have annotated this as configuration property. Okay, I have used this annotation. This annotation allows for reading your configuration values. Okay. And also, if you look at my greeting controller over here, I have also used that enable configuration properties, this particular greeting properties.class. Now, if you notice this one, this is display fortune. is being used for turn off as well as turn on. If it is turn on, it is true, then you will be seeing some adding fortune over there. Now, in real time, there are some situations you're going to come across, where you need to turn on this fortune as well as turn off this particular fortune over there. How do you achieve this? Is one such question comes into picture. So for this, I just go back to your repository. In my repository, what I try to do, I'm going to edit this file. There is the last property is there. What is that last property which I'm going to do is nothing but I'm going to say there is a property by name called display fortune. Here I can set this fortune to be true or it is a false. I'm going to set this property. And after setting this property, what I need to do here is, very well, I commit the changes here. After committing the changes, my config server would able to pick those value. So you can see that your greeting display fortune is being picked, but still, your application wouldn't be reflected. The reason, if I just refresh my greeting here, still it would be picked the old values for us. It would be still a old value. So what you need to do, you need to go to your postman and you need to send a request here. Let us send this manage refresh endpoint. And you can see that greeting.display fortune is added. The status code is 200. Now, if I just go to that, property called, let me clear the screen here, the log information. See, whenever I call that refresh endpoint, you can see your client. There is your config client. It tries to fetch that config server once again. This information you would be able to see that. So I clear my screen now. And now, once again, what I try to do, I just refresh my greetings. Now you can see that the fortune is being added. You learn from a mistake. You will learn a lot today. So what I have been done, I have been set one of the property here. You can see that add greeting as well as add fortune, the debug information is displayed. So in other words, this particular property is true now. Now, the next thing which I like to show you here is, I wanted to show you that there is one more interesting thing by name called, there is, if you look at this, I have a code and there is a code service. You can see that there is a code service over here, which is again a service component. There I have been used the annotation called refresh scope. Now in this refresh scope, what I am trying to do here, I'm going to retrieve that URL. Okay, so this particular URL, I would be retrieving the code service URL. I would be retrieving dynamically. Okay, so that is what this is all about. And to get this code service URL, see that I also have a code controller, and this code controller, what it tries to do, you can see if I try to call this random code, it tries to retrieve the value. This is what the get code would be trying to do. This is a controller class. Now, in my application, if I just go to your browser here and say, 8080 slash random code, you can see as of now it throws some exception for me. I was knowing that it would throw that, saying that it is an internal server error. The reason behind that error is, one of the property I haven't said, the code service URL is from the code where this is my URL. I need to set this in my configuration properties file. So let me try to go to my, greeting config.xml file. This would be my last property. I would be setting it here, and this would be my code service URL. I save this file, commit my changes, and after committing my changes, I look for my config server. My config server is picking it, my code service URL. Now I go to my Postman and hit that refresh endpoint to retrieve that code service URL. Then I go to that, random code and refresh. It says that your code service dev 12345 cfapps.io does not exist. Now let's look at that, whether it is existing or not. It is being present here. Let's paste this URL. Okay, the code service is down. Let's look for cf apps command. This is a Cloud Foundry command here to see that whether my service is up or not. I just run my code service. It is still showing me not found. Let's look for your config server, config, and look for my code service. There is my controllers, code controller, and this is my code. Let me hit that slash code over here. Okay, I just got a message saying that this is a text for a second. I was almost jealous of the clouds. Okay, but where this has been deployed, it is being deployed into your development space, I believe. So let me try to look at your application here. It is my code service URL. Which is taking to the code, but here it is not reading it. Probably I just let's uncomment this value and let me run my code service. Probably that code service URL I'm not able to run. So let's stop my greeting config and let me run my greeting config here. Now, let me try to hit that URL. That is my random code. Let me refresh it. I still have this does not exist over there. Code service dev. Okay, it is looking for a dev there. Okay, let's do one thing. Let us see. This is a QA. Okay, I think I did small. Let me say. Let me go to this config server. Here, it is a dev here. I just need to hit it, saying that it is QA 1 2 3 4 5. Then I commit my changes. Probably that would have been giving me an okay. It is still looking for a QA. Let me change this to dev. Then let me commit my changes here. Okay, it has been changed here. And now what I try to do here is I just navigate back to my config server and see that my config server is reading it as dev 1 2 3 4 5. That's okay. It is running it, my code service URL. Now I just hit that refresh endpoint. Okay, and now let's go for my client here, random code. Okay, still the code service dev dash 1 2 3 4 5 is does not exist. It was a internal error, that is a 500. Let's see that error here. It says it is giving my HTTP client exception, saying that this is not able to find. So probably that service might be down. That is the reason it is trying to say that it is being not available. Now, let's stop this server. Let us stop this server for now. Let me stop this server for now. And what I like to do here is let me change. Let me look at your CF apps. It is QA URL. Okay. So my app, what I like it to do here is I want this one to run in a profile called QA. So I just navigate to my command prompt. This is my greeting config here. What I try to do here is I'm going to first let me look at your configuration git. It is I revoke the changes. I change these changes to QA. Let me copy the URL properly. This is my code service QA. I copy it, and I like to edit the changes in my code service URL and say code. and I like to commit my changes. Now, in my command line, what I try to do here is I just set my application, that is one of the property called spring underscore profiles underscore active. I set this one to a QA profile over there. That's an environment variable. Then I clean my Maven wrapper and say that clean, then say spring boot run. So when I hit this spring boot run, so it is trying to fetch from the greeting configuration, and you can see that my profile now is being set to what? It is being set to a QA. That is, I have been changed the environment to be what? I have been changed the environment to be as QA. Now, what is next thing I'm going to do? I'm going to go to that, you know, URL, which is my localhost 8080. Instead of manage, I say, okay, you say manage.env. This is my endpoint for getting my environment variables. If you look at that, you can see that my active profiles here is QA. Most of them would also provide an URL like saying that it is slash, instead of manage, they say env, it would show you 404 error. Because I have been configured my actuator environment, actuator in endpoints to have this manage. So now if you look at this, you can observe that my active profile here is a QA. My active profile is a QA. And also, if you just scroll down, this is my port number. If you look at other interesting thing, it says that the bootstrap properties, it is looking for my greeting config dash qa.yml as well as greeting config.yml. So if you look at your config server now, like if you observe this config server, I not only have this greeting config here, I also have a special file which I showed you initially, that is greeting config QA. So now you can see that the URL I've been set, code service URL, to something, cfapps.io. This is the value I've been set. Now let's go ahead and hit that random code. Yes, I got it. See that a developer code service is not up and running, but for QA it is been running. And you can see this information. For a second, I was almost jealous of clouds, and I'm getting it from QA engineer. And this code was originated from this service. And who provides this code service? As of now, it is being provided by your Pivotal Cloud Foundry. Pivotal Cloud Foundry. Now, code service for developer is not available. Because it was not available, I was not able to get this information over there. That is where I was getting an internal error saying 404, it is not available for me. So once you know all these things, the next question comes here is it possible for me to deploy it in a cloud platform and see the output here? Yes, you can do that. All you need to do here is you need to, let me stop all the services which is running here. First, I'm going to stop this one. I stop this config server. That is, my config server is stopped. Then also I try to stop my, config client. And after stopping these services, see that I have been configured one manifest.yml file. Let me close all the files here. So if you look at your greeting config, there is one file called manifest.yml file. In this manifest.yml file, I have been configured my name of my application and also the route of my application, and it needs services like config server as well as your cloud bus. So you need to create what you need to create this config server as well as your service called cloud bus before you try to deploy your application into your PCF environment. So to create a config server, you can observe that this is my config server. There is already one file is there. There is a config server configuration JSON file. In this JSON file, I have already configured the Git with that particular URL. Now, first thing first, let me create one of the service in Pivotal Cloud Foundry by name called config server there. So I just open the terminal, and in my terminal, I just navigate and say Cloud Foundry, get my services in marketplace. So you can observe that there is one of the service by name called p-config server. And the plan, you can see that there is a plan called standard, there is a plan called trail. I would be using this trail plan over there. So you just go back to that config server, say cf create service, and say that my service name, that is p-config server, and say this one to be as a trail. That's the plan name, followed by what? Followed by my name of the server to be as config server over there. Then minus C, then specify that configuration sphere config.json. Uh, Let us get CF from, let's go to this PCF Pivotal Cloud Foundry over there. And look for the Pivotal Web Services. I'm going to log in. And there is my PCF education. There is my marketplace. and look for a config server here, and it is TRIAL. Okay, typo mistake. So it is TRIAL over there, trail, and then run it, and you can see that your config server is created. Okay, access is denied. I'm getting it, but you can see that the service instance is being created. If I look for a CF services, you can observe that a config server, okay, is being created, and it is in progress. It takes some time in order to create it, okay, but you need to observe that you don't need this config server application when you're trying to deploy it in your PCF environment. All right. So I'm going to give a pause here. I'm going to stop my session here. I hope you enjoyed your config server and config client in a local environment. Okay.
Hi, sir. Thank you for your valuable inputs. So the questions, I guess you can see that. The Q&A, you can start it now.
Okay. So you can type your questions over here.
Sir, can you see the questions tab? It is already there. You can see the questions are there only.
Okay, somebody, Ashwin is QA is running server. Yes, that is the only question I'm having.
Oh, yes, sir. And as discussed, please continue with uh, your questions as well.
Okay, I see some of the questions here. Okay, I'm having a question from Manjunath Pai. If I have a QA environment, in that case, the application.properties and application-qa.properties, both files would be loaded. Yes, application dot properties is a default file, and application.qa would be your QA environment specific file. So both the files would be loaded over there. Okay. Then there is one more question for me. If I have a QA environment, in that case, I have answered your question, Manjunath Pai. So one more question, like greeting client, can I have access to other to YAML? Which are the Git, right, apart from greeting config? Ashwin, I'm not sure your question is clear for me. Okay, so basically, you need to Yeah, the greeting config, that is a greeting client, does not have an access to other YMLs apart from the application dash profile specific. Okay, you are asking me, can I have access? No, it won't be having an access to other files apart from its application specific. That is what it is all about, Ashwin. All right. So this was the two questions coming into picture. So I have been answered for you. And another interesting queries here, like whether you can connect your config server to a backend. Yes, you can connect your config server to a backend database over there. Now, one more question would be coming, whether this config server, which we have been implemented, will it be useful in a cloud environment? Not actually. If you're using a PCF environment, that is what I showed you that, if you're using your PCF environment, you need not write your own config server over there. So it would automatically if you now look at your CF services, you can see that that config server was created successfully. Okay. We are configuring it in your Git repository. So if you look at your Git repository over here, in a config server, we are trying to configure it here. Application specific YAML files. Now, in my example, there is only one application that is nothing but creating config. If you are having multiple applications, you can have multiple uh, application configuration files over here. Okay.
So I guess all the questions are already answered, right?
Yes. I
Okay.
think Ashwini wants to have a talk. She was not able to unmute. That is what she is saying.
Okay. So uh, no problem, sir. We will share the recordings with her, and all your questions, if you want any answer, you can mail us at the Spring People. So just you can type it, and you will get our website, and you can write us that whatever question you have, that will be answered by Vinod only. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar. Thank you, Vinod, for giving your valuable inputs. So we are ending for today, and shortly we will share the recordings as well.
All right. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thanks.